So what I'm doing here is going through Glowtica or Glottica, however you want to pronounce it. Glottica is probably a better pronunciation. So the term Glowtica it's actually from a Greek word which is called glotticus, and glotticus is the larynx. It represents the tongue and the larynx. And so Glowtica is just kind of like a it's like the lip, the throat of the Acropolis of Destiny. So Glottica is this ancient city and it's submerged underwater. I've got a number of stuff going on here. I'm just going to start working on the concept in theory and, whatever. I don't really know where or how to pick up the pieces, but I'm not going at this point in my life. I'm just so sick of allowing what Stefan and Unixmat have done to stand in the way of reality. And the reality is that Galactica is real. And when I stepped away from it, it's because I don't want to keep going over the story with you guys. I've gone over it in other videos. So I'm going to go over it here, and I'm just going to start fleshing it out, because this is something that has always been meant to happen. So Glottica is a part of the Acropolis. It's the throat, the lip, the tongue of it, of this world here. So this is, Destinopolis is right here. This is the center of it. And you can see it kind of comes up to a peak here. Now, I never had much time to really flesh Destiny out. You can see even a lot of the trees are just like in like rows, just perfect rows. They're not even like offset with each other to look more realistic. What Destiny was and what Glottica was, it was very much a prototype. And it takes a lot just to get a prototype out takes a lot of time, like I talked about before. So what you do then is you go back in and you start fleshing things into it and adding more detail. So you add more definition to the cliffs. You stack the cliffs. You make sure they're not so square. You make sure that the trees aren't all just perfectly lined up. You go through the buildings and you make sure that the buildings look original. They're not all just like, run of the mill placeholder houses. You extend the cliff sides down, you add different graphics, you add different, stories and things into it. And you start just fleshing out the details of the landscape and making it more and more and more interesting. So I never was able to do that. However, where I got left off in 2000, the year 2000 was um, the prototype for Glottica. And so this needs a lot more detail. A lot of these buildings are, again, they're very kind of cookie cutter cut out. Just because laying down the layout for it already took a massive amount of time. Again, all this stuff had to be laid by hand. And so getting it to a place where it felt really kind of balanced and interesting, and looked interesting in the landscape of Destiny, took a lot of time. You can't just throw stuff together and be like, oops, look, I have a game. It has to be fucking interesting. And so it took a lot of work to hand lay this stuff and make sure it was fairly balanced just for a prototype. So what we're looking at here is a prototype. A lot of the buildings are they're kind of the same building, but in the end, that would never be the case, right? You would never leave all the buildings the same building. And I'd start adding more definition and depth into here where there's more cliffs and more different quests and barriers, and the roads, would have more deterioration, and they're not all just so boxy and stuff. But looking at the prototype, without going too far ahead of how long it takes to really make a game super fucking awesome, and that's kind of where all this stuff was. These levels are still actually in the levels pack from before, so this was always a thing. It was always meant to be. You can pull them up in the old level pack. They're still there. They're just hidden. This is a hidden lost world. It was on the map, and so let's just make it a thing. Let's just start making it a thing. So what we have here is I have some prototypes, and I started just naming certain things, so that this is no longer just a preliminary prototype, but now it's becoming a real world. So what I did was, you can actually zoom in here. Let's see here. So I went ahead and I made a rendering using my engine, actually. I used my engine to pull up, one of those. So you can actually, if you play in the old levels, you can find these old levels and you can play them yourself. They're actually in the level pack. I think they begin with Destiny G is the name of the file names, and there's 20 of them because it's 4x5. Again, there's not much there. This was just the prototype, the layout of the world, which I spent a lot of time trying to make balanced and interesting. That's a lot of work. Just the prototype takes time, guys. You don't even understand. I guess it's a lot faster now when there's like things are being like AI rendered through like the auto level generator and stuff. But like, you know, this is going back to 1999 to the year 2000, and this deserves to be handcrafted. This deserves to be appreciated for what it is and how much time was put into it. This deserves to be fleshed out and no longer just a lost world. It is a lost world. That's also, what's one thing that's interesting about it is it is. So like into the Destiny Bay, what happens is like there's a river and that river actually runs in through this cave. So like technically like there's this river and it's like a spring and where the god bow is. This is where you could get the god bow in there originally. So through this cave, like, this was a volcanic kind of acropolis. All the trees are kind of like red and on fire. You can see a lot of things are orange. So like through this like the peak of like this kind of volcanic cave that was formed I don't know, maybe thousands of years ago. There's the god bow in there, and then there's a spring of water that starts to kind of like pour through forth through the cave, and that runs down through this river here into the bay, and that's where all this water is being flooded. So now there's like this plateau. There's like this plateau of water that had maybe 1,000 years ago erupted and sunk the city of Glowtica. And Glowtica may not be its actual original name, right? Like that's what its ancient name may not have ever been a Glowtica. Maybe it, that was just the name that they have named it today because they found it, right? Like maybe like they found this lip, and before they found the city under the water, maybe the lip of the plateau had been called Glowtica. And so now what happens is we find that there is a sunken ruins underneath this plateau. So these need fleshed out. There will be like, a plateau of like interesting like cliffs and stuff here. And then there will be like a cascade like down a fucking mountain all the way around this acropolis. And that'll go down into further and further more cities and interesting stuff that I have actually been planning over the last 20 years. I've actually been thinking about this stuff. I just thought to myself, like through all of the trauma and stuff, I just go back and forth. I'm just like, you know what? Like, I'm not going to keep thinking about this because it's too hard. It's too tragic. And so like I write things down, I think about things, and then I just push it to the back of my mind and I start working on other projects because like just the history of all this stuff. But I think that adds to it. I think that adds something to this. The history of having continually worked on Destiny and Glowtica for 20 years, I think is interesting. So let me just start putting some of that stuff together for you guys. So, there's like this little lip just like at the top of this Acropolis that kind of sinks down a little bit lower than the Acropolis itself before like it starts to cascade down like mountainsides. And and I don't want the mountainsides to be too steep, otherwise it just becomes like the whole map just becomes a bunch of cliffs. I think it needs to be like cascading like short plateaus so that there's like all kinds of cool stuff. And then maybe in some regions, especially in the deeper recesses, there's like steep cliffs and it goes down into dark woods and things like that, or like dark jungles, murky things. So like through here, I just started like kind of laying some of the stuff out. So like inside of Glowtica, and I'm just making this official. So like we have this underwater riptide. So this is an underwater riptide, and it's called Leucodacia. So Leucodacia is this riptide, where like this kind of waterfall comes down into the water, and this is coming down from above it, and so it continues to like help like pour down through here through like these old ravines that used to be exposed, right? But now all of this is water, so there's not really ravines, but there is like this underwater current. And so like the water can like, push and pull things. And this waterfall here, like, who knows how deep that goes. But it adds a force of movements underwater, and Leucodacia is maybe the original starting point of where this city began to submerge, so it would have began to flood over here. I decided to go ahead and make this Manny's house because Manny was a recurring character in some of my quests, and I don't think it's the most beautiful or clever name, but the word mana kind of means magic, so I'll stick with Manny. That's fine. I prefer to do like more beautiful words and things nowadays. I always have, but now like I've gotten better, I think, at it. At least I try to. So like, that's always an evolving art to try to make sure that like your language is interesting enough, while still being, I think, relatable. So we'll stick with Manny. That's fine. I don't think it's the most creative, but he is a recurring character and people know him. Let's go down through here, and a lot of these like red houses, these are things I haven't named yet or fleshed out. So there's a lot of them. And of course, these aren't necessarily going to look like houses in the end. They might look like temples, they might look like large towers, they might look like, deep, broken, and they're not just going to be square. Like one thing that I don't like about Graal is that like so many buildings are just square. And I think that like, where I'm at as an artist, I don't think it needs to be like that. So these aren't all going to be square in the end, and they might be ruins and like, chisel out deep into the ground where like caves had eaten through the basement. And like it goes down into the ground and things like that. So a lot of these places are, but these are just placeholders. You have to start with something. You have to start with some type of prototype and then add detail and make them fascinating later. So we'll go ahead and just leave all of these red. I have not named them, but I wanted to name some of them just to give it some kind of, flavor, something going on here. So what we have here is this half of the map, and I think largely mainly just this neighborhood, but you can see here that there is a roadway that connects this region here. And we'll consider this to be one connected neighborhood, and then we'll consider this to be another connected neighborhood. And I want this to be more like prestigious, wealthy people. So I started naming some of the stuff after people who had worked with, helped me with like programming NPCs in Destiny as an homage to them because I love them. So like we'll give Gandarian a house down here, that's fine. We'll give Darkman a house down here. I don't care if Gandarian or Darkman ended up with a house anywhere else in the game, that's fine. They can have two houses, I don't give a shit. This is also not going to be in Unix Matt's game because I don't like Unix Matt, he's a pedophile. But Gandarian will have a house here, and Darkman will have a house here. And so Keliofed here is, I just wanted to do like a clever twist on Kyle 0654. So Kyle 0654, if you take his 0654 in his name, then you can have the letters, it's like 0FED. So I wanted to like change his name into something that looked like a word rather than like a boy's screen name on AOL. So I changed it to Keliofed, which is like a twist on Kyle 0654 and 0654 being turn into letters of gematria. So we have Keliofed, and then we have Asabif's. So Asabif's house is going to be right here, and it's going to guard the hidden library of Odmatarsh. So Odmatarsh and Asabif is going to be, he's going to be like the keeper of this old library here. And so Armageddon's going to get a house because he has a trading post. He needs to live somewhere, so we'll give him a fucking house there. And Ganmon's going to have a house here because we like Ganmon, whatever. And their names are not trademarked or copyrighted. I'm just going to do it as a tribute to people from Destiny and stuff like that. That's just the way I do things. So Eastward Splinters was like this coffee shop from Graal 2001. I want to start porting things over from Graal 2001 into here because they were supposed to be in here in the first place. And so Eastward Splinters, I'm actually going to change it into something I think a little different. It's going to be the same thing. It's Estward Splinter. Instead of Eastward Splinters, it's Estward Splinter now. And you go in there, and it's going to be kind of like this, the remains of like this old tea house coffee shop thing, and it's going to guard the gates over to this area. So over to this area, you can't get in here. The goal is you have to like rise above water and sink down below water. So you can't get across the water because it's going to be too deep, and this city is going to be too deep. So you can't really get across the water with your human. You have to ride a bomby across it. And then you also have to use your bomby. You have to flip back and forth between your human and your bomby. And with your bomby, you can get into your gravity boots, and you can sink down into the ancient ruins of Glowtica. And so down here, there's going to be a lot of different quests and things you have to do, a lot of caves, underground caves and stuff you have to go into. And I think caves can be boring, so they have to be done right in order to be interesting here. And I think that, there can be a lot of different underwater weird creatures and stuff, a lot of different hurdles, a lot of different dangers and things like that. But one of the biggest key element here is going to be like elevation. So you can take your gravity boots off or turn them off or whatever in order to float upward. So like if you're deep down in a cave and you need to go upward, you take your boots off and it'll take you upward and a level or two, and then you can put them back on if you want to go back down even lower. So the idea is there's going to be a lot of elevation. That's what Destiny's about, right? It's an Acropolis in the clouds. Everything's about gravity. Everything's about up and down. So like you got to go deep down and find like different things down in caves. They're going to be way down in here and stuff. This is just a janky prototype of what Glowtica, was as a starting point. Everything needs to be fleshed out more. So anyways, over here, you're not going to be able to get here. I'm not really sure what to call this. I guess I just called it like Jenga, like a Jenga cave, or a Jenga castle or some sort. And so the goal is you need to eventually get through to there, but you can't get past S-word Splinter, and you can't get past Vespert or Damus because these are going to be blocking you for various reasons. So eventually you have to figure out how to get past S-word Splinter and Vespert and Damus in order to get through here, and then you're going to have to finish what you need to finish. Maybe there's more of like a climax and easy sailing for here before you go into Jenga, and then you go down further into the map, which is taking you down further into the jungles and things like that, and that's where things get a little more dicey, right? That's when things start getting to even harder and more difficult and interesting in terms of quest, right? Because this is just like the start of the game. So in terms of like forest, we have the Hoons and we have the Paniers down here. So the Hoons is like this forest up here where like people kind of live, and then the Paniers are going to be down here. In terms of neighborhoods, we have Cedar Sulphur and With Ravana. So Cedar Sulphur and With Ravana are going to be kind of split. They're going to be split and divided. There is going to be a dispute in the ancient world between these two neighborhoods. And there's going to be a lot of obstacles that really, I think, visually and mechanically separate them two. So Cedar Sulphur and With Ravana are the two halves of Glowtica. It is going to be very difficult to, mend the gap between these. And I think that, maybe this one's more peaceful, this one's more horrifying. But there's also culturally a difference between the two. And perhaps what happened was, when Lucadeja first started flooding this area as well, maybe this went underwater first for a long time. And so while this is more deteriorated, there is going to be, I think, maybe more stuff here. So people probably kind of left this area and came over here a little bit. So you're going to have a lot more junk and debris and stuff over here in the end. Because as the rivers or the spring or whatever flushed the area even more, then over here is going to be even more daunting, because that was just the final clasp the world that was holding on to its breath. So we have, in terms of this, there's going to be the Assabeef's Pass. There's going to be a cave here, and then I decided to name these two bridges. So we have Gestalt and Dismal Crossing, and then up here there's the Corsidi's House, Paradegan, and Gepethica. So Paradegan and Gepethica are going to be best buddies. Maybe there was even a relationship going on between them, but they're a thing. So Paradegan and Gepethica are a thing, and yeah, so I'm not going to go too deep into all this stuff, but this was just getting some start, because it's kind of sad and pathetic that this was never fleshed out. But now it's getting fleshed out. There's stuff going on here. There's a bunch of, as you can see, all these red spaces, they still need to be labeled, and things need to be figured out. Quests and things, the way that they tie in, are going to need to be figured out. Are they all going to be teeny houses, or are they going to be, some of them are going to be giant castles, or giant towers, or ruins descending deep into an abyss? We don't know. So I don't think they all need to stay this little square house, because that's just a placeholder, right? So where we go from here, I don't know, but I do think I want to start naming, some of these streets, the rivers, or little old waterways that were there. that are now trenches deep in the underwater world. And just moving forward.